I think this is the first time I've taken a break from YouTube where I wasn't also taking a break from writing, unintentional or not. So that is to say, though I have not been posting videos about writing, I have still been writing. I've still been fairly productive, and I've still been, well, productive is a tricky word. The key thing is that I've been showing up to writing sessions. If not regularly, then often. If not every day, then most days, and that's totally fine. Hello, long time no speak. So my name is Sydney, and I do videos about creative writing and my experiences with those. I'm not the kind of writer who's going to teach you how to write or who's going to tell you best ways to do things. Where to begin? The funny thing is the last vlog I posted was like a writing vlog in October or November or something, and it's hard to remember exactly what it was because I continued to vlog after that into December and I didn't post it. I didn't end up posting it because it started to feel, and this ties into what I'll get into more with what I've been doing writing wise, but it started to feel that I was only working on my story in a way that I could then talk about it to the YouTube channel. I was predominantly working on my hotel story, and I was starting to get to the point where I wanted to switch to my storm cloud story, but I felt like if I switched to my storm cloud story, then I would have to then come and put a video about it, basically recording and talking about my every single thing I do writing wise. I have to like post it in a video, and that's kind of the mindset that I was in, which is not the mindset that I like to be in, and I didn't even realize that was the mindset I was sort of getting into these last few months. And I was basically shaming myself for wanting to switch writing projects, especially because my whole thing about Hotel Story was that I wanted to establish a writing habit, and I wanted to kind of train myself to focus on one writing project until I saw it through all the way to the end. So until I got to the end of a draft, and until I got to the end of a draft of Hotel Story, I didn't want to switch to Stormcloud or Pitchfork or any other story that I'm working on. I wanted to focus, finish it, and then move on, clean break. Obviously, that's not always possible. You know, being a human being, being a writer, being Sydney, you know, it's not possible to just do things cleanly like that. And it's okay. You don't have to do things cleanly like that. But I was getting on myself about it, and I was missing the point of what I wanted with Hotel Story. And it wasn't just to train myself to focus on one project at a time. Like, as lovely as that would be, you also kind of have to listen to yourself and go with your gut. And my gut was telling me that I wanted to switch to Stormcloud, but I was refusing to listen. The whole point of Hotel Story was to have fun with writing. That was the main thing, is I wanted to have fun with writing. A side note was that I wanted to be able to like train myself to focus and to stick with a project, but only as much as I was having fun with that project. Only as much as I felt that I could continue adding to the project or to make the project better. And Hotel Story has never been a story that I've wanted to publish. From the beginning, it's only been a story that I wanted to just have fun with writing. No strings attached, no publishing strings, no pressure, just to be able to work on this story without any pressure about publishing. Because what publishing does, and I have a whole video talking about my thoughts on how publishing can affect writing. It's from a couple years ago, so I probably have new thoughts on the topic, but publishing can, with me, it's caused me to make decisions with my characters, with my storytelling, with my world building, with my plot, that I might not have otherwise made if I was just writing the story for me. And I didn't like that. I didn't like feeling like publishing was this black cloud hanging over me, raining on my parade constantly. You know, I'd maybe want to make this decision with the character, but oh, would that appeal to readers? Would that turn them off? Would they not like that? You know, like, who cares? Like, this story is supposed to be for me. Even if I did want to get it published one day, I have to write this story for me first. I have to make these videos on YouTube for me first. And so in that sense, publishing and making YouTube videos about writing was starting to come to this point where I was starting to make decisions basically for other people who were not currently reading this story and who may never read this story, instead of making the decisions for me. Like, what I want with these stories, what makes me happiest, should come first, because at the end of the day, writing is like my passion. It's something I love to do, and I don't want to compromise that just for the sake of being published, because I don't feel about publishing the way I used to. Like, I've realized recently, like, let me tell you, the last 6 or 7 months, since the end of 2020 summer to like the beginning of this year, the last few months have been like a whirlwind of epiphanies and revelations about like how I feel about writing and what I want from writing and what writing means to me. Publishing was, yes, it's always been a thing that I've wanted to do as long as I've been writing, but I started to realize, like, you know, sometimes your dreams and your aspirations change as you change as a person, as the world changes around you. And sometimes it's hard to recognize whether your dreams are dreams that you still actually want, or if they're dreams that a past version of you wanted. And I was realizing that publishing was like the pinnacle of life for what past Sydney wanted. Like, current Sydney would like to be published, but if I don't get published, it's not the end of the world, you know what I mean? Like, I would rather have these stories to make me happy. Sure, there's a way to have both. Many writers do it. That's great. But I'm purely talking about me and my experience right now. So, and sure, I might jump back on the publishing train at some point in the future, but I don't want to put pressure on myself. I don't want to put a timeline on myself. And for the first time, I feel a monkey has been off of my back. Now, don't get me wrong, I love monkeys. But metaphorically speaking, I feel like a weight is just off of me. Like, I can finally write without thinking about publishing, without worrying about publishing. Or if I do start to think or worry about publishing, I'm much better at being able to kind of check myself, like, hold up, are you making that decision for you or for publishing? Because there's usually a difference, you know what I mean? So that's the first thing. That kind of gets into like why I took a break from YouTube as well. In stepping back from the idea of publishing, I kind of also wanted to step back from YouTube, because what YouTube is, yes, I make these videos for me, and I've always said that. Kind of wanted to just turn off all the cameras, turn off all the outside voices, and just kind of focus on me and like what I want from my stories without worrying about what other people are thinking about it. That's the thesis statement. I don't want to have to answer to anybody else about my creative writing decisions. And it's still something I'm struggling with, you know? It's still something I'm learning about, but I've definitely made some wonderful and satisfying strides in the last several months. And I'm proud of Sydney. So what else? What else is going on? So with all that, I've basically reminded myself why I fell in love with writing in the first place. Like, what are the things that I've loved about writing from the beginning that maybe I've lost sight of? So definitely having that freedom. You know, there was a time back when I first started writing for a few years where I never even considered publishing. It was not even on my radar, and I just wrote to make me happy. I wasn't even trying to finish stories. Like, that wasn't even a concept. I didn't finish my first full draft until 2016, which at that point was like 7 years after I started writing more seriously. But that freedom, that ability to just write a story, make things up and just run with it. Like, I don't even think I didn't do that much planning. Like, I did planning, but not to the extent that I do now. Like, I was just a whole different writer back then. You know, at some point I should sit down and just kind of figure out specific ways that I've changed as a writer. And I definitely have done that before. It's nice to reflect on that kind of thing every now and then. See where you came from and how you are now. You know? Like, just going through my life day to day, I don't always realize the ways that I've changed. But sometimes I'll sit down and be like, oh, wait a second. I used to do it that way, or I used to believe that. And you realize, you really do see how far you've come, like how much you've changed as a person. Even if it's just very subtle ways, even if it's very gradual. Or heck, if you woke up one day and something just drastically changed about you. Like how I just suddenly woke up one day and I wanted to wear high heels and eat all the spicy food, even though I hated both of those things before. For context, I'm 5'10" and a half, and my mom is from the Caribbean, so I've been falling back in love with writing in very refreshing and lovely ways. And I've also been learning a lot about writing and storytelling, but just also taking the time to think more carefully about plot points and like, okay, does this scene, for example, develop the character a bit more, but does it also move the plot forward? Like that kind of thing. Like just basically paying more attention to those kinds of things in the story. I mentioned Hotel Story before, and I'm not working on Hotel Story right now. Hotel Story was the story that I wrote just to have fun. And so I realized that if I was holding on to it so tightly by not letting myself switch to Stormcloud, then I was sort of missing the point of having fun with Hotel Story. And I was in the middle of a scene when I kind of just decided to switch to Stormcloud. And I'm perfectly fine with that because I'll come back to that story when I feel like working on it. All these things that I've learned the last few months, I've learned while writing Hotel Story. And one of the things that I've learned from Hotel Story that I really like, that I want to take with me into future writing projects, is that I discovery wrote the book. Whereas the last few stories that I've written, I've plotted a lot. Like I would plan out the whole story, outline the whole thing before I even like sit down to write a scene. But then I would leave a little bit of room for seeing what happens as I went, as I wrote the story. So when I was writing Hotel Story, I discovery wrote. I had a very bare bones kind of idea, and I had a list of scenes that could happen at some point, but I didn't know in what order. I didn't know whether they would actually happen or not. They were just sort of darts that I threw at the wall that when I needed to figure out what scene I was going to sit down to write next, I would just sort of pull off one of those darts and be like, oh, that sounds like it could happen next, and then just sort of write the scene and see what happens, and then continue doing that as I went along. I really, really love that approach. I did not realize how much fun discovery writing is. Like it really fits well with the whole just having fun with writing, just seeing what could happen, letting loose, no pressure, you know. And so as I've moved into Stormcloud, which is what I'm working on now, I really wanted to take some of those nuggets that I've learned from Hotel Story into Stormcloud. And so I completely rearranged my notes with Stormcloud. I moved all of my old or obsolete sort of notes into a completely separate notebook, and then I read through every single bullet point idea that I had. I organized it by world building ideas versus character ideas versus like emotional or thematic ideas versus storytelling or plot or whatever. I basically just started with a clean slate with Stormcloud, and then I started adding in the things that I could see happening in this book. And it's been nice to just start fresh, which is really hard, I will say. I don't know how many of you writers out there have been working on the same story or the same world or the same characters for like as long as I have. I know like with my Stormcloud series, I first conceived of the general idea in 2009. It is now, what, 11 and a half years later, it's 2021, and I'm still working on this story. But the thing is it's gone through so many like complete overhaul changes. I've had 4 or 5 completely different main characters with different names, different personalities, different lifestyles, different stages, whatever. The world generally has stayed the same, except I've built it a lot more. I've gotten a lot more specific with the details of the world. Just things have changed so much, basically. So I've been working with the story so long, and I have so many of the basic ideas and the basic tenets of the world and the characters like so ingrained in my brain that it's been one of my biggest challenges with working on this story and revising it in the past, is that I couldn't ever get to the stage of completely being able to re-envision the story. Like when you're revising, you need to be able to re-envision the story, to see it through brand new eyes. And I could never completely see it with brand new eyes because I was always thinking about what I already knew about the world, what I've already decided about the world. And so if I had new ideas to like improve or change the world, I couldn't quite see them just because I was so set in my ways about the story. So with it having been since this summer, I think August was the last time I was working on this story when I decided to put it down and write Hotel Story. It had been at that point then like maybe 5 months before I picked up Stormcloud. I started working on it again sometime in like the middle of December. Probably one of the longer breaks I've had since I started working on this story. And that combined with all of my revelations and epiphanies about creative writing in general, and my learning, taking the lessons I've learned from Hotel Story, and then also just wanting to come to this story with a completely fresh approach, you know, and also just realizing that the approaches I was taking before, you know, they either worked or they didn't work for one reason or another, and knowing what those reasons were. All of that came together and just made it a lot easier for me to sort of see the story with new eyes. At this point with Stormcloud, we're at draft 9.1. Are you following me? I'm just over 20,000 words into the draft. And I've officially hit the 20,000 word slump, which always happens for me between the 20 and 30,000 word mark when I'm writing chronologically, which I usually do. So, and I only just realized it yesterday because I was like, the last few days I have not been able to figure out why the scenes that I'm working on right now just aren't working, and I finally realized it's because I'm in the 20,000 word slump, and it just was like a light bulb, like of course that's what's going on. Okay, this is fine, I can handle this. On draft 9.1, the major change that I have made is that it is no longer just my main character Race and her mother in the beginning of the story. It is my main character Race, her mother, and then Race's two sisters. So now there is 4 main characters, Race, her 2 sisters, and her mother at the beginning of the story, living their life, and then their world changes. The thing that you don't know about Stormcloud, there's a lot of things you don't know about Stormcloud. Every single main character before Race had siblings. There was always a different sort of family dynamic going on and there was always different plot reasons for why the family dynamic was what it was. I had a friend who read the first few chapters of a way earlier version of Stormcloud. One of the problems that they pointed out with just having Race and her mother was that it's just Race by herself with her thoughts. But what's more interesting from a storytelling perspective is having Race interact with other people, other characters, instead of just Race kind of bouncing off the wall of her own thoughts. I didn't necessarily have that point in mind when I decided to add Race's sisters in. It was sort of just an idea that I had, and so I just sort of like played with that idea, and very quickly it became clear that it was a great idea. Like, it was exactly what the story needed. I found that it's injected like all this life into the story and even into my main character. Like, I'm learning so much about my main character Race. It's kind of like how, you know, you are who you are. You have your own personality, right? But then when you interact with your friends, they see one side of you, and if you interact with your coworkers, they see a different side of you, and if you interact with like your parents or, you know, whoever, like strangers, like everybody who you interact with sees like a different side of you. And so I realized that I was only seeing one side of Race. Like, Race was only really showing me one side of her because I was really the only other person she was interacting with, like me, the author, and her, the character. But when I put her sisters on the page and her mother, she suddenly had all these other sides to her. Like, she became a much more multifaceted character, a much more interesting character, and very different than I thought she was. Like, still at the core the same person, but I was suddenly like realizing all these other aspects to her character, to her personality that I had no idea existed before. And it was just like getting to know her all over again, and it's been like so exciting, and I love it. And it's made it so much more interesting to write this draft because suddenly it's not just Race and her thoughts or her mom, it's her sisters as well. And I'm not just writing from Race's perspective, I've actually been writing from all 3 sisters' perspectives. So it's also been trying to figure out who they are as people, like what are their personalities and what are the different sides that they show each other versus, you know, other characters. And so, and also like the dynamics of the sisters, you just learn a lot. Like, I've been learning a lot about these characters and about the world, and having to build their personalities and having to figure out also, in the grand scheme of the plot, I know what Race's role is. Like, I know what role she plays, but what roles do her sisters play? Because I don't want them to just be like shadows on the page. Like, I want them to have like their own motivations and their own goals and their own sort of plot lines as well. And of course, all the plot lines in one book should probably fit together somehow, should interact somehow. And so it's also about figuring out how everything plays together in a way that makes sense without overcrowding the book, or without watering the book down too much. But, and also with that is that each of their plot lines take them through different parts of the world, and so I'm also getting to explore other parts of this world. Like, so I've been doing a lot more world building and writing scenes in new places that I hadn't even conceived of these places when it was just Race as the main character. But now that her sisters have their own perspectives, they're going to places that Race would have never gone to, meeting characters Race would have never met. One more thing I want to say is that, so going back to how I said I was in the 20 to 30,000 word slump, I am sort of trying to dig myself out of a hole now, like where do I go next? There's going to be like 3 or 4 parts within this book. So I've written part 1. I'm very satisfied with how part 1 went, but I do need to figure out the beginning of part 2 and how Race gets to the next step that she's supposed to get to. Because I want to stay true to her character. I don't want her making decisions that are out of character just so I can get her to a certain plot point. So we'll see how much of the plot's going to end up changing just because Race is, again, she's a different character than she used to be. She's a lot bolder than I thought she was. I knew her as being this very sort of kind of meek person. Like she's brave in her own way. She's not really the kind to like step out of her comfort zone so much as she was to be pushed out of her comfort zone. But I'm realizing that she's got a lot more agency than I was giving her credit for. And also just giving her a lot more agency, I wanted her to be a more active character, and it's a lot easier to do that with who I'm learning she is as a person. But within being with that 20 to 30,000 word slump, I just basically need to figure out where I'm going next. Taking a page from Hotel Story's book, where I'm kind of discovery writing right now, which is fun if I know where I'm going. Or if I have an idea of where I'm going, but I kind of don't know what I'm doing in the next couple of chapters. I have a couple of things that I want to happen, but I'm not really sure how I want them to happen, and I don't want it to just drag on and not be interesting. So I'm thinking that I should do a little bit of small scale outlining. So instead of outlining the whole book, which I don't really feel like is necessary for me right now, because I have a good idea of what's going to happen a bit later with Race. At least I do have to figure out each of her sisters' plot lines, like what their outlines are going to be, or at least where they're going to end up. So I know kind of I know where I'm going. It's just a matter of how do I get there. But I'm thinking I might sit down and outline in either the next couple of chapters just to have an idea, or outline each of her sisters' plot points. If Race's plot is the main bloodline of the story, her sisters are like these other plot lines that weave around it back and forth. Okay, I think that is all I have to say right now. Don't know the next time I'm going to post a video. If I have something to say, I'll say it. But I don't want to have to answer to the vlog. You know, I kind of want to just take things at my own pace. And I don't want to rush things, and I don't want to put like a schedule or put any pressure on myself with my creative writing. Because again, at the end of the day, this is my love. This is for fun. This is for me. And I need to do things how I see fit. So, thank you so much for watching if you stuck around to the end of the video. And I will see you soon, maybe. Toodaloo.